He was the greatest demon lord in history, but when he reincarnates into the future, after 500 years he finds that everyone is now stronger than him. The story begins in the world of M.A.F, where there's a war between the humans and the immortals, and the fate of the world depends on the fight between. The strongest of the two sides, the human Herogram and the demon lord Velto, it would usually be a useless fight since Velto is immortal. But thanks to Graham's holy sword, he manages to deliver a blow that's strong enough to overcome Vel's regeneration. Velto praises him, wondering how he lost to A. Mortal, even though he's stronger than him in every way, Graham notes that Velto thinks mortals are weak since they will all die, but he believes it's the thing that makes them strong. Velto refuses to believe such a stupid thing led to his defeat, but Graham mentions it's the reason he won, even if he doesn't believe it. As his body turns to dust, Delta promises to return, but Graham notes he will fight him again. If that happens in the present, VTO awakens from his slumber, and a girl named Machina welcomes him back, revealing she has been waiting for him for 500 years. She apologizes for how she's dressed, but he tells her he doesn't mind, glad that she was able to perform his reincarnation ritual. He decides they should conquer Nth once again, but she mentions the world he once ruled is long gone. She notes that 80 years ago, Alpha and Earth were caught in a catastrophe which caused the two worlds to fuse. 90% of all people were wiped out, and the national government stopped working, so the cities started functioning as independent states, which led to a number of wars between them, but things are now relatively peaceful. And she mentions that Earth was advanced in technology, and after being combined with the magic from Yalat, it led to even greater advancement. She shows him the current state of the world, and he can't believe how far the mortals have come. A man almost bumps into him, but Machina pushes him out of the way. He can't believe the man so easily bumped into her, one of the 6 dark peers, so he decides to teach the mortals to fear them. Once more he fires his magic into the sky, and it blows a hole in the clouds above, but the people just think he's an idiot using weather magic. An alarm goes off, and Machina reveals it's forbidden to use magic within the city, so she takes him and runs away. She notes that after his death, they agreed to a ceasefire with the humans, but after the fusing of the two worlds, the citizens of the Immortal Kingdom had to scatter across the world. After that, the major industries started hunting them because the world collectively decided that immortals didn't deserve human rights, and they were treated like vile creatures. As the humans continued to become more advanced, they developed Anti-Mortem. Because she was one of the only 2 people who knew how to revive him, VTO realizes she hasn't mentioned Marcus, which startles her, and she tries changing the topic, asking him if he's thirsty. She tells him to stay put while she goes to buy him a drink, and as he waits, he notices lights floating around the area. They seem to be drawn to a girl, and she suddenly makes certain videos appear on all the screens in the city. She seems pleased with herself, and as she leaves, VTO confronts her. He knows she was the one who changed all the screens, and she acts like she doesn't know what he's talking about, but he mentions he saw the fluctuations in the ether around her before all the screens changed. She's surprised he could tell that she was the one who did that by just looking at the ether, so she wonders who he is, but she doesn't believe him when he tells her he's the demon lord. VTO doesn't understand how she was able to change the screens, but he feels she's a genius, which makes her blush, so she knows she just hacked the screens. VTO mentions he's looking for Marcus, asking if she knows of him, so she points him towards a huge building, saying Marcus is the CEO of the company. So he goes to the building and asks. He talks to the receptionist. Marcus's private secretary Kinara mentions they've been waiting for him. As they ride the elevator, Kinara sees him staring at her, so he notes he was just interested in the creature she has on her shirt. So she mentions it's the mascot of the Ishimaru magic industry called Ishim, and they plan to create a movement around him in the future. They arrive at the top of the building where Marcus greets Velto, but he thinks it's disrespectful for Marcus to stay seated in his presence. Marcus asks Velto why he came to meet him, but Velto notes he should be celebrating his return before asking questions. He tells Marcus to help him rebuild the Immortal Kingdom so he can once again rule the world, but Marcus starts to laugh, saying he's not going to help him. VTO prepares to teach him a lesson, but Kinara suddenly tries to slice him, so he jumps back to dodge, and Marcus tells her to stand down, and he notes Velto has become weak because in his prime he wouldn't have needed to dodge the attack, so he isn't going to bow his head to him. He tells Velto to leave, and he notes that if he begs, he might consider helping, which makes Vitiel angry, so he prepares to teach him a lesson, but Marcus cancels his spell before he can do anything, which shocks him. Marcus starts to laugh, thinking Velto must be wondering why a person like him who can use magic without chanting has been made powerless by someone without talents. So he reveals the device on his neck, saying it's the reason he has become stronger than him. Delto has no clue what it is, so Marcus pulls up a video of him explaining the device. We learn the device is called a Familia, and Marcus mentions there are 5 steps for activating magic, but with a Familia 3 of the steps are removed, allowing people from all races to use magic. Marcus notes that he made the Familiar so it can't be used by higher beings like Velto, or else he would lose his advantage. Velto tries to attack again, but Marcus breaks his spell once more, noting that even though Vel's magic casting speed is fast, the Familia is still faster, so without one he'll always be 2 slow. Because everyone has one implanted in their body, Velto doesn't understand why Marcus is against him, so he says he has always hated him because he was better than him at everything. Marcus summons a number of blood, so WS shooting them at Velto, and as he falls out of the window, Marcus thinks he's dead, so he plans to be the next Demon Lord. We see Velto manage to survive, but he knows that his regeneration isn't what it used to be. He accidentally runs into a group of men, so he gets thrown in the garbage, and after Mychina finds him, she apologizes for not telling him about Marcus's betrayal. But he notes that even if she had told him, he would have still gone to meet him. She takes him to her apartment building and is impressed, thinking she has the whole building. But when she takes him to her tiny apartment, he thinks she's joking, but she knows it's all she can afford, he realizes. She's been living like this while waiting for the last 500 years, so he hugs her and thanks her for her loyalty. We go back centuries to when Mychina was about to be killed by her own people, because they think she's the reason for every bad thing that happened to them after finding out she's immortal. They throw stones at her, and as they push her into the volcano, Vitiel suddenly saves her. He finds her beautiful, and he doesn't think she should die such a worthless death, so he tells her to come with him in the present. Mychina wakes Velto for breakfast, and he's surprised by how delicious it is, which makes her happy. He asks her if she knows where the other immortals are, so she notes that a few of them managed to survive like her, but they have recently been going missing. She mentions she has lost contact with her close friends, and he wonders if the immortal haunting is still happening, but she notes that the hunts ended several decades ago. She mentioned she went to her friend's room after they went missing, where she saw there was a struggle, and she found a note mentioning the immortal furnace. Velto accidentally spills the tea, and he mentions he's still recovering from his injury since his regeneration has slowed down. He knows he doesn't have his full power since he couldn't use his magic to its full potential, and Mychina notes that it's because the faith that served as the source of his power has greatly declined in the modern age. He knows that without others recognizing and turning their emotions towards him, his power of faith is lost, but he isn't worried since his life is eternal, and he simply needs to reclaim the faith. Mychina suggests they go shopping, and she takes him to a market where he's surprised because the shop seems empty. But she tells him to step on the 3D scanner, which will help them choose the best clothes for him. She feels bad since she can't afford the expensive things, but he notes his personality is such that even ordinary clothes will look good on him. She asks him if he has any preference in style, but he leaves it up to her, and she tells her Familia to select the best option. It suggests a tracksuit, which he finds perfect, and he notices a design on the back, so he wonders what it means, and Mychina tells him it's written in an old language, and it means the Demon Lord. As they leave the shop, Vitiel stops her since they didn't pay for the clothes, but she tells him the payment was deducted automatically, which surprises him. He becomes curious about her Familia, so she reveals that apart from its use in magic, it also helps in communication, shopping, and even gathering information. She mentions that unlike smartphones, which have gone extinct, Familia are more convenient since they don't need to be held physically. He starts touching her neck as he looks at it, and as she enjoys herself, she gets a notification that her heart rate is elevated, but she just ignores it. He wonders if it bothers her since it's attached to the nape of her neck, but she says she has grown used to it. She mentions how it has become an important part of them, but it doesn't necessarily improve one's life. Delto thinks he should get a job, but China stops him, saying she can pick up more shifts to improve their living conditions, but he declines her offer because times have changed, so he can't stay idle while she works to provide them. With all the necessities, he tells her he hasn't given up the idea of conquering the world, and Machia swears to serve him for as long as she lives. As Velto is about to leave, she tries to join him, but he stops her since she has her own work, and in the unlikely scenario he can't get a job, they'll both be depending on her income. So she agrees to let him go, but she gives him a device which he can use for payment and to contact her in case of an emergency. As he looks at the device, he wonders what type of job he can get, but his stomach suddenly growls and he notes it's the first time he has ever felt hungry, so the decline in his faith must be severe. He realizes he can't be choosy and shouts that he needs a job since he's broke, saying he's willing to do anything, but a man stops him and tells him to visit the commercial guild. If he needs work, he asks Velto if he has a citizen ID, but he's clueless, so the man thinks he must be an illegal immigrant. He says that this is his turf, so Velto apologizes and leaves, but the man hands him an application form and tells him to take it to the commercial guild. He can't guarantee it will help him get a job, but he thinks it's better than nothing. He guides Velto toward the guild's location and warns him to stay away from any company under the Aishimaru group because they have a reputation for exploiting their workers. Velto soon arrives at the guild, where a clerk interviews him. Since he has no previous work experience, he only mentions his skills related to his role as the demon lord, like his experience creating dungeons and leading a nation. But the man tells him there are no positions for him because they have a policy of only hiring people with the familial implants. After being rejected, Delta returns to Machina and he asks her if she thinks he is incapable of doing anything in the present era because he's losing his confidence, but she tells him they are just fools that aren't capable of measuring his greatness. He asks her if she knows anyone who can offer them advice, and she says she knows a person, so he's happy that she has a friend. They meet Mach and his friend Takahashi, and it turns out to be the girl Velto met before she realizes he wasn't lying about being the Lord, because Makina always told her about him, but she never believed her stories. He wonders how they met, so Takahashi mentions they met online, but seeing Miki's reaction, she decides to spare the details. GTO touches her familia since he finds it different from Marcus, which surprises her, so Makin explains he used his Sage Eyes ability, which allows him to use the flow of mana to understand the composition of objects. That he mentions he has a general idea of what's going on inside the familia, but there's still a lot he can't analyze. After that, he asks Takahashi to help him find work, and she wonders if he has any preference, so he notes that he would prefer something that will make his existence known around the world. After considering his abilities and his lack of a familia, Takahashi suggests he become a streamer, so he wonders what that is. She tells them they broadcast themselves playing games, chatting, and even singing, and they earn money from ads and donations. She assures him that it's easy, and she mentions she will even let him borrow her old stuff, but Machina isn't happy about it because she thinks he should find a more stable source of income. Takahashi mentions Velto has a great voice and a pretty face, so everyone will love him, which even Makina can't deny Machina is used to. Living alone in her apartment, so when she accidentally comes out of the shower with nothing on, she gets embarrassed and apologizes to Velto, but he tells her there's nothing to be ashamed of, and he even raises her physique. Takahashi arrives with the equipment, and as she assembles everything, Makina is worried, but Takahashi tells her to trust in her best friend because she has already planned everything. She tells Velto to check out his new setup, and she tries telling him how to use the controller, but he uses his Sage Eyes to learn how it works. He selects a game, and Takahashi worries because it's like Dark Souls, but she thinks it shouldn't be too difficult for him due to his powers, but he dies almost immediately after losing several times in a row. Takahashi thinks he sucks, but Velto notes it's fine since he isn't used to playing on the controller. Makina wonders if their plan is falling apart, but Takahashi tells her it's the opposite since his perfect personality will contrast with his poor gameplay. Takahashi thinks they need to come up with a good intro because out of the millions of streamers in the world, only a few are making money, so She thinks he needs a unique catchphrase that will leave its mark on people. Mike China suggests quoting something from his war declarations, and after seeing it, Takahashi thinks it's alright and says they can improve it later on. Takahashi tells him to stream every day even if no one is watching Sheep. Also tells Machina to stay out of the room while he's streaming so she doesn't get caught on the camera, because they can't have people thinking she's his girlfriend. After that, VTO streams every day and his subscribers slowly start growing, but not everyone is a fan of his gameplay, so he gets troll comments, but he is unaffected by them since both positive and negative emotions toward him increases his power. But Machia struggles to tolerate such disrespectful remarks about her master. VTO eventually reaches 1 million subscribers, so he decides to play a new game, but while he streams there's someone that spies on China. When he finally clears the game, one of his viewers comments on how he was raging, but he notes that if that were the case, the whole world would have ended after that. He goes out for a walk and tells him she'll have dinner ready by the time he gets back. As he walks through the streets, he's shocked when he suddenly sees the hero Graham among the homeless people we go back to before Graham became a hero, and we see him taking care of his sister. He leaves to gather herbs for her, but his father stops him and hands him a sword so he can protect himself. He starts gathering the herbs, but on his way back he sees an army of dragonfolk, knowing they are led by one of Vel's generals, and he's surprised by why they're all the way out there. But when he gets back to his house, he's horrified to find it burned to the ground along with his entire family, so he swears to get his revenge on Velto. Back in the present, Velto takes Graham to a noodle shop and mentions that the food is amazing, but Graham seems uninterested and simply agrees with whatever he says. Graham mentions it's strange that he's eating with a man who killed his family and allies, and Velto notes that he feels the same way because several of his allies were killed by Graham, but he no longer feels hatred towards him. He asks Graham how he's still alive, and Velto wonders if he has somehow become immortal, which would go against everything he believed in, but Graham mentions that it isn't the case because after defeating him, the goddess Melia rewarded him with eternal youth, but he's still a human. Graham tells him that after the war against the Immortals, a civil war broke out, and he was ordered to kill those he had sworn to protect, but once peace was restored, he became their next target, and he was exiled from his own country. He wonders why Velto wanted to rule the world, and he reveals it was for peace, which shocks Graham. He notes that almost all immortals were once mortals, and there isn't much difference between them, so as one was strong, he planned to rise above all of them and rule over the weak, to create a peaceful world. Graham disagrees with his idea of peace through domination, and leaves after thanking him for the food. But he's glad they had the chance to talk. As Velto returns to the apartment, he hears a familiar voice and notices Takahashi arguing with an ogre in the alley. He prepares to beat her up, but Velto grabs his arm and stops him, telling the ogre he will give him a chance to leave, but the ogre remembers how he beat Velto before, so he thinks he's just acting like a hero in front of a girl. He threatens to kill Velto, and Takahashi tells him to run, but he mentions he wants to test his new powers since he has gathered over 1 million subscribers. The ogre tries to punch him, but he stops it easily with his hand. The ogre counters with a wind blast, which breaks his arm, but he instantly heals it using his magic and flicks the ogre into the trash. Velto mocks him for being too weak to even serve as a good test, and Takahashi rushes to thank him. He wonders why she was with the ogre, so she mentions he was supposed to be her bodyguard, but he started asking her to double their agreed payment. She knows she has found a better bodyguard, and she offers to pay Velto for his help. Meanwhile, Marcus asks Kinera if there's any news of the rats sniffing around the immortal furnace, but she tells him that they have been eliminated and everything is going as planned. After that, we see Velto and Takahashi outside a warehouse where she needs to steal an item, and his job is to ensure her safety. But as she checks her system to confirm the details, he rushes in and breaks the door, stumbling upon a user operation. He asks Takahashi if the cube on the table is what she's looking for, but she's surprised by how he's communicating with her since he doesn't have a familia. He mentions he reproduced a familia's ether communication using magic, and he notes that there are only a few enemies, so he will just take them out and grab the target, but Takahashi tells him To avoid killing them, he performs his stream introduction, but they don't recognize him and think he's mocking them, so he decides to test his powers on them. They start shooting at him, so he uses his magic to create a barrier around his body, which allows him to easily deflect the B bullets he tells. It's his turn and rushes toward them, knocking them out one by one. As he dashes at the boss, he tries to shoot Velto, but Takahashi hacks into his familia and overrides his perception, so he hits his partner. Instead, Velto finishes him off with a kick, and Takahashi is impressed by his skills. She prepares to collect the cube, but Velto senses something and stops her from approaching. Velto is suddenly attacked, and the enemy seems to be cloaked with invisibility, so Velto uses the gun to blast the cloak off, revealing a giant mech. Takahashi recognizes it as a 4th generation of Menino gear, which is used by the special forces of the city guard. She wonders how the accuser got it. Takahashi tells him they should leave since it will be impossible to defeat it, but he thinks it will be a good test. The mech activates its weapon and starts shooting at Velto, but he dodges it and jumps into the air to fire his magic at it. He manages to land a hit, but he knows it won't be enough to take out the mech. Since he isn't at his full power, he realizes he has reached his limit from the faith of 1 million subscribers, but he thinks he can still win, and he takes out his sword. He dashes toward the mech, which also converts its gun into a sword. They block each other's attacks, and Velto encourages it to show its full power, so it gets serious, and it suddenly cuts off his arm and slices off his head. The pilot reports back to the headquarters that the target has been eliminated, but they're shot when they see he is still alive. Velto mentions he's so impressed, but tells them they lack battle experience because they let their guard down just because they cut off his head. He takes out his demonic sword Viral, and the mech is frozen. In fear, Velto cuts off its arms and legs, saying it was a good fight. But they were unfortunate to be up against the Demon Lord. The pilot reports that he failed to eliminate the target, and he ends his own life to avoid being interrogated. Velto is surprised at the ability of modern weapons to enhance a person's power to such a level, and he finds the new era terrifying. But Takahashi thinks he's even scarier since he defeated a Magino gear by himself. She notices the Ishimar logo on it and believes that the Yakuza could never get their hands on such tech, so the job might be more dangerous than she anticipated. VTO wonders what the cube is, so she notes it's a data storage device made from methyl, and she needs to check what's inside it. They open it and find a list of names which Velto recognizes as all of his immortal subjects, but Machina's name is luckily not included. Takahashi tries to contact her client Yu for more information, but she's unable to reach him. And she tells Velto they'll need to visit him in person, and he says that since he's the king, it's his responsibility to take care of the immortals. They soon arrive outside a large apartment building, and Takahashi uses her hacking to get past security. They enter the elevator, and Velto asks her to let him press the buttons since he likes pressing them, which she finds strange, but she notes they can't go directly to the 13th floor, and they must follow a specific sequence of buttons. They eventually reach the 13th floor, but Takahashi stops him from entering, saying there are traps. He uses his powers and notes that all the magical and physical traps are disarmed, so she's surprised, and he explains his duties as the Demon Lord included the construction and maintenance of dungeons, so finding traps is easy for him. They reach outside Yu's apartment, and Takahashi rings the bell, but no one answers. Velto realizes the door is open, which Takahashi finds strange because IU isn't the careless type. They smell something rotten, and Velto realizes something isn't right, so he thinks they should proceed. With caution, Takahashi finds Seth's body, and Velto recognizes him from when he met him before, even though he looked different, so Takahashi notes he was always disguised as a homeless person. Whenever he went out to gather information, VTO analyzes the body and concludes he was killed a few days ago. Takahashi thinks it must have been his enemies, but Velto believes it to be the work of a professional. She thinks someone might have hired an assassin, but his familia has also been destroyed, so Takahashi thinks the real goal might have been to destroy the information on his familia. Velto thinks the only lead they have left is the list, but Takahashi tells him they may have another option. She reveals Yu was an information broker and an ether hacker, so he must have kept a backup of his familia, which she finds inside a hidden drawer. She connects it to the computer, and there is surprisingly no password, but all the files seem corrupted, but Velto notes that the folders are arranged in a specific order. To hide the real file, they managed to find a video where we see E revealing that the whole city relies on the ether reactor, which is running off the lives of innocent people. The reactor draws ether from the lines running through the ground, powered by the planet's core that convert energy into magic and electricity. But to power the entire city, the reactor must sit on 10 ether lines, but it only has 2, so because of this shortage, generating power for the whole city is impossible. So that's why the Immortal Furnace project was started. The furnace burns mortals, converting them into ether for the city, with a single immortal soul able to produce more ether than 1,000 mortals. According to S sources, they hired the homeless and outsiders to build the project, and they were all killed once the furnace was complete. He mentions how the people at Ishimaru called these immortals firewood, and the first immortal that was fed to the furnace was the Dark Panel. The immortal hunts were just an excuse to gather immortals, but he believes the company is running El Daldo on firewood, which is why they were buying a list of immortals from the user guild. He mentions that once they run out of usable firewood, the entire city will be affected, but he can't allow them to continue. He notes that he saved all the data there, leaving it up to whoever watches the video to decide what to do, adding that the only one who can resolve the problem would have been the legendary demon Lord. VTO wonders if they should leak the information, but Takahashi thinks it will just be taken down and she will be killed like you. VTO thinks that as the king of the immortals, it's his responsibility, so she doesn't need to trouble herself with it. She notes that they should at least inform the officials about the body, and VTO thinks he should also tell Machina about the situation, but he isn't able to reach her. So he worries that something has happened to her. We see Machina in the apartment as she thinks about what to make for dinner, but she suddenly gets a visit from Marcus, and there's a huge explosion. He calls her Colt for attacking him on sight, and we see Machina in our combat form. They fire their blades at each other, but Machina charges through the smoke, and she blows off his arm, but he instantly regenerates it, and he summons even more swords. Machina protects herself with a barrier, so Marcus tries to blow her up, but we see that she's okay. Kinara tries to attack her, but she manages to get away. She decides to take Kinara out, but Marcus cancels her spell, and Kinara stabs her from behind. She tells Marcus he should have disabled Machina Familia from the beginning, but he notes he couldn't help having some fun. He gets Brick seeing her on the ground, and Machina wonders what he did to her, so he reveals he shut down her Familia. She thinks it should be impossible to hack since her Familia was standalone, but he reveals that all Familia have a back door, and using his new advanced Familia, he can shut any of them down, so there's no one who can defeat him. After that, we see Velto as he gets back to the apartment wondering what happened to Makina. They realize there was an explosion, and Takahashi hacks into the delivery drones around the area, so they find out Marcus was the one behind it. They see him taking Machina away, and Takahashi realizes that she's being taken to the furnace. Velto prepares to save her, but Takahashi tells him he can't just charge in because the reactor area will be protected by lots of min-max. She knows that she can't do much in a fight, but Velto realizes there's someone who can help them. He ends up finding Graham, and he kneels to him to ask for his help. He explains how immortals are being burned to power the city, asking Graham to help save Machina. Graham notes that if he destroys the reactor, it could also mean the end of the city, so he asks Velto if he plans on killing everyone just to save one person, but Velto decides he will save both Machina and the city since he's the Demon Lord, and he's the one who will rule over everything. He asks Graham to help him once more, so Graham agrees, but mentions he's only doing it to save a woman that's been kidnapped, because it's his job as the hero to protect the weak. Takahashi guides them to an underground area that can lead them to the reactor, but Velto thinks they don't have the time to clear a dungeon, but Graham uses an original skill he created to easily map out the dungeon, and Velto tells him he has no pride as an adventurer, mentioning how much effort he would put into making his dungeons in the past. So they start to argue, but Takahashi tells them to focus, reminding them that Mach's life is on the line. Graham detects no traps, so he thinks they can take the shortest path to the reactor. VTO asks Takahashi if she's ready, but she notes that it's taking longer than expected, so they might need to buy her more time. They approach the furnace on an elevator, but they lose their signal to Takahashi. As they get closer to the reactor, Graham notes that Belto has gotten stronger, so he thinks Graham is being sarcastic, mentioning how much weaker he is, but Graham tells him his past self would have never been strong enough to have bowed to him for the sake of one of his vassals. They arrive at the reactor, and Kinara is surprised they actually showed up, but that's